Is this better? Oh, it is better. Okay. Do I need to go back through that again? All right, yes, please. All right, from the cameraman in the back. I'm Joanne Clyde. I'm the Director of Multilingual for the Illinois State Board of Education. With me is Natasha Wilkins, our Senior Resource Allocation Policy Fellow Specialist with our Finance Department here at the Board of Education. And we are going to be talking about leveraging resources, blending and braiding funds. This session is being recorded, so if you have questions or comments, we ask that you use the microphones so that way people watching in the future can hear your comments and your ideas. So I'm going to turn this over to Natasha. She's going to start us off.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Joanne said, my name is Natasha Wilkins. I've been with ISBE since about in July, so I'm fairly new to the work. My title is Senior Resource Allocation Policy Specialist. That's just a fancy way of saying that I'm the person that works in the Finance Center but looks for the connections between the financial aspects of education work and the programmatic aspects, and I act as that bridge, that liaison between the two. A little bit more about me. I'm a former classroom teacher. I focused a lot on equity during my time in the classroom. I then went to law school with the goal of figuring out how can we really embed equity into education work. I graduated, was looking for a policy space, and landed at ISBE, where I am now doing this work. And braiding and blending is a great way to really think about embedding equity into the work that you all do. So the purpose of today's conversation is to really assist programmatic leaders, assist EL directors, bilingual directors, with maximizing the use of federal funding received under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. We're going to talk a little bit about IDEA, and then we'll also have some conversation around the pandemic relief bills that have been passed and the federal education funding that is available through those and what you can potentially do with that. All thinking about sustainability and programmatic longevity. So federal law authorizes districts to coordinate spending from different grant programs, provided that two things happen. One, the activities are permitted under the grant program, and that the district maintains documentation on how federal funds are spent. Our time is going to focus really on blending and braiding. Blending being when you take different federal funding streams or different funding streams in general, and you combine that financial assistance under a single set of reporting, which really looks like a smoothie, where each thing you put in a smoothie, so say you add a banana, you add apples, you add spinach, you put it all together, you can't tell what's what. That's the same thing that happens when you blend funds. All of those different funding streams lose their individual identity, and it's all reported under one funding source. Whereas braiding, on the other hand, and braiding is a little more common. Braiding is where you have like a braid, different funding streams, they all maintain their different identity. Although they are used to achieve one purpose, you can really track where each of those different funding sources are coming from. Each funding source maintains its individual identity. So why should districts think about blending and braiding funds? Federal funding is distributed through the individual federal grant programs, which come through ISBE, and then ISBE subgrants the funding to the districts. Districts can leverage the federal grants and other grants to support activities that drive performance and improved outcomes for all students. When we think about blending and braiding, this is really a way to maximize funding and maximize the opportunities that you can use to support students through your federal, not only federal, but also state and local funds. The decision on whether it's appropriate to braid and blend funds is a program-specific and a situation-specific question. One place where districts right now can really start to think about and identify as opportunities to braid and blend is in the Consolidated District Plan. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that plan later in this presentation. As you're thinking about blending and braiding, there are really three parts to this. One is the plan. Second is thinking about the resource or cost allocation methodology. And then the third part of blending and braiding is the reporting. And the feedback that I've heard from districts often is the concern really comes in with this reporting piece. Districts want to make sure that they are reporting accurately, and so at times districts are a little bit hesitant to blend or braid funds from different funding streams because they're concerned that they may not report it accurately. We hopefully, through this presentation, will help lessen some of that concern and show how powerful a tool blending and braiding can be in really creating programs that support students with the things that they need. When you think about this first part, the planning aspect of blending and braiding, you're first going to assess the needs of your district. So a strong comprehensive needs assessment is really the foundation of effective blending and braiding. You want to identify the needs of your district using tools such as the CDP, figure out the needs of students first. This is really a student-centered cost allocation methodology. You look at what do our students need, what funds do we have that can support those students, and then you plan, well, let me back up. You look at what do our students need, what programs can we create to support those needs, then you look at the funding. So the funding is really the last part of blending and braiding. It's students, then programs, then funding, and the planning, and then the reporting. So this is just another visual of what that looks like. You will have some overlap. So it's not necessarily a strict chronological process of plan, then you think about the cost, then you report. There is some overlap as you're looking and assessing and thinking about how does this need to look in order to best support our students. As I said, the Consolidated District Plan right now is one of the strongest mechanisms that ISBE provides to think through opportunities to braid and blend funds for students. The Consolidated District Plan can help district teams blend and braid funds to report such plans to the state. And as a district amends the individual grant application to blend funding, they should review the CDP and amend it if the scope has changed. And again, that comprehensive needs assessment really is the foundation of identifying what do students need, what programs are we going to use to support those needs or create to support those needs, and then what funding do we have available to support those programs. So reviewing the needs assessment for each program comprehensively across the district will really support the development of a comprehensive plan, and braiding and blending is very much about creating a holistic comprehensive plan to determine where funds can be blended and braided. Specifically, bilingual directors play a very important role in this process and should be involved in completing the CDP. So I don't know if any of you were in my last session where we talked about evidence-based funding, and we said that ISBE strongly encourages bilingual directors to be at the table when you are completing your evidence-based funding spending plan. It's the same thing here. We strongly encourage districts to have bilingual directors and other programmatic directors at the table when they are completing the CDP. We want to think about the system as a whole and think about how can the various programs that are already happening in the district support and benefit ELs, and then also if anything additional is needed to support ELs, what does that look like? So we don't want to think about these things in fragmented, segmented pieces. We want to think about how can Title III or EL EBF funds support programs that are already happening. You want to think about how can other funds support your EL specific programs, for example, Title I funds or Title III funds. If you need additional EL parent engagement, think about your Title I parent engagement funds and how those can be engaged to support the work that you're already doing. All of this can be identified through the CDP, and blending and braiding, or the purpose of the CDP is to give you a place to capture all of this and to identify opportunities to blend and braid and really break out of those silos and maximize the effectiveness of funds. So this is just a screenshot of the CDP. The CDP right now contains 12 federal formula grants. However, these are not the only grants which can be braided. I'm going to repeat that. The grants in the CDP are not the only funds that can be braided or blended. There are others. The elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, or ESSER programs, are not mentioned on the CDP, but they can also be used to braid and blend in addition to title funds for the benefit of students. This page that we have on the PowerPoint, it is from the CDP. On this, the LEA selects the programs that will be funded and describes how they will align the resources with state and local funds to carry out the activities supported in whole or in part with funding from the programs selected. Your district will need to check the boxes that are appropriate to your funding sources in the CDP. So that's a general overview of blending and braiding. We're now going to go into a little more depth with blending, which we don't have a true blending. We have what's called hybrid blending, and we'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, and then we're going to go into a lot more depth with braiding. So again, blending is combining the federal sources in which each individual funding stream loses the original award-specific identity. Blending requires specific statutory authorization, and a single project may have both blending and braiding. So if you blend funds for, let's say you want to have an after-school program, that after-school program can have both blended funds that are a part of supporting the students in that program, as well as braided funds. When you blend the funds, separate reporting is required for each federal funding source, as well as for braiding. Hybrid blending is currently the only blending that is available. In hybrid blending, you can use Title I, Title II, and Title IV funds together. You can transfer those funds between Title II and Title IV, or Title II and Title IV into Title I. So Title II funds can go into Title IV and be used as Title IV funds, or Title II and Title IV funds can go into Title I and be used as Title I funds. I want to make sure that piece is clear. I'm seeing some people doing a little bit of nodding. Okay. So when you do that, though, the funds still maintain their original identity in reporting. So they can be used. So if you blend Title II and Title IV funds into Title I, you can use them as Title I funds. But on the reporting end, the back end, they're still going to be reported as Title II or Title IV funds. Braiding is a little bit different than blending. In braiding, there is financial assistance from several sources, and it's coordinated to support a single initiative or strategy, while each individual award maintains its award-specific identity. Here, you do not need statutory authority to braid. You can braid when you identify a need in a program for various funding sources or opportunities for various funding sources to come together to support this one program. Braiding can result in lessening programmatic costs, but it also may require good program or project management to ensure proper coordination of the funding. So while the CDP contains 12 federal formula grants, there are other opportunities to braid funding. The funding sources listed on this slide can also be used to braid funds. The LEA or the district should review all funding sources when considering braiding funds. So that means if you're thinking about a program that you want to support with your Title III funds, it does not only have to be Title III funds that are used. Again, that example I gave of you can also braid your Title I funds. If you have, again, going to go back to that after-school example, after-school program, we're going to really use this to support our English learner students. We're going to use as the base funding Title III funds, but we also want to add a parent engagement piece. You can use Title I funds to blend that. And it can also work the opposite way. If you have a general after-school program for all students, and EL students are going to be a part of that as well, for supports that are for EL students in that program, the Title III funds can also be brought into that program to be used there. So braiding and blending do work both ways, both in supporting those specific student groups for individual programs, but also supporting them in wider general population programs. When braiding funds, it's important to consider allocability of costs. So these are some of the specific things that you need to think about or keep in mind when you are braiding funds. Allocability or cost allocability is part of that. So a cost is allocable to a grant if it benefits that grant or is attributable to the grant. A federal program that funds all or part of a project must receive a benefit relative to the contribution it makes. So that means if you're using a portion of a grant and you're using 50% of that grant, 50% to support a program, 50% of the benefit of that program should be allocable to that grant. And we'll explain a little bit more what that means in our example slides. So there are several requirements for determining if the standard for allocability is met. First, the cost is incurred specifically for the grant award, and this is the easiest determination. Second, the cost benefits multiple project awards, that is, shared costs that are not unique to a particular grant, but benefit the grant in question nonetheless. And third, the cost is necessary. Necessary means that a reasonable, prudent person would agree that the cost advances the goals of the grant and serves the grant's intended audience in a manner that is consistent with the intended focus of the grant. So the basic principle of direct cost allocation, and this is summarizing all of that, is that if the cost benefits two or more projects or activities in proportions that can be determined without undue effort, then the cost must be allocated according to those proportions. If the proportions cannot be determined without any undue effort, then the cost may be allocated in proportions based on any reasonable documented basis. To make sure that the basis is used for you must make sure that the basis used for cost allocation makes sense, and the cost allocation should be something that the grantee can easily track. So basically what that is saying is that when you use funds to support a program, you need to be able to identify, is this program falling under the required statutory, what's the right word for that would be the required statutory, expectations for this grant. If the grant says it needs to be used to support parent engagement, then you need to make sure the portion of the program that you're using the funds for is for parent engagement, and you need to be able to track that and show that. So when you're braiding funds, it does require some very intentional tracking of funds, but it can also offset costs in a way that was greatly beneficial to students and can allow for greater programmatic support overall for the student populations that you are working with. Now I'm going to turn it over to Joanne to walk through some examples to show how do you do all this? What does this actually look like?
All right, so we have a scenario one. So the LEA, aka the school, has a multi-tiered system of supports in which federal program funds are used to serve each program's subgroup of students. So the district has done a needs assessment. They've looked at the needs of the students and the programs that they have, and they really want to focus on this MTSS system to really benefit all the students, to make sure every student's being addressed. So they've identified these resources, these federal funds, to help them do that. Title 1A, IDEA, Title 2, Title 3, and Title 4. So they have identified these funds. There it is. So all schools in this district operate a school-wide Title I Part A program. So the LEA reserved district-wide Title I Part A funds to support the screener, assessments, and the intervention program. IDEA funds will provide supplemental intervention programming for children with disabilities. Title II funds will provide professional development on the intervention program for all teachers. Title III funds will provide supplemental intervention programming for English language learners, and Title IV funds will provide the technology needs for the program. So it's all tied to the MTSS, and they've identified which of the grants and which of the funding streams can support the overall program. Reporting includes the Consolidated District Plan, the Title I school-wide plan, grant periodic performance reports, and expenditure reports. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of potentially required documentation. Districts should talk to their district's auditor or financial reporting person in order to make sure that all of the financial reporting is done appropriately. So in this scenario, again, various grants are coordinated to support MTSS. The activities are allowable under each applicable grant, yet these grants continue to maintain their identity, and expenditures for each are documented by the LEA or school. Federal law authorizes LEAs to coordinate spending from different grant programs, provided the activities are permitted under that grant program, and the LEA or school maintains documentation on how federal funds are spent. So, how do we allocate the costs for this? So in this example, the cost allocation is straightforward. Each grant program expends funds on a specific aspect of the MTSS. Since each individual expenditure is contained within an individual grant, i.e., no costs are shared or among grants, the costs are charged to and claimed within each individual grant directly as planned. So Title I, Part A, costs related to the screener, the assessments, the intervention program. IDEA, costs related to supplemental intervention programming for children with disabilities. Title II, costs related to professional development on the intervention program for all teachers. Title III, costs related to supplemental intervention programming for English learners. And Title IV, costs related to the technology needs. Pretty easy breakdown, fairly simple. Let's look at braiding scenario number 2. So to mitigate learning loss, the LEA plans to offer a summer school program. The LEA will utilize ARP ESSER III funds to provide teacher salaries and benefits. They'll use Title I, Part A funds to provide supplemental materials and supplies for summer school program. IDEA funds will provide supplemental intervention programming for children with disabilities. Title II funds will provide professional development on the summer school program for all teachers. And Title III funds will provide supplemental programming to support English learners, and Title IV will provide the well-rounded curriculum. In this scenario, various grants are coordinated to support the summer school program. The activities are allowable under each applicable grant, yet these grants continue to maintain their identity, and expenditures for each are documented by the LEA or school. Again, federal law authorizes LEAs to do this. To coordinate these grants. And as ISBE, we expect you guys to braid and blend and to coordinate your funds. Again, the reporting documentation, Consolidated District Plan, Title I School-Wide Plan, GATA reporting, those grant periodic performance reports, and expenditure reimbursement reports. So again, the cost allocation is straightforward. Each grant program expends funds on a specific aspect of the learning loss plan. Since each individual expenditure is contained within an individual grant, the costs are charged to and claimed within each individual grant directly as planned. Braiding scenario 3, we also address the needs of students with disabilities. So to address the district's disproportionate number of suspensions for Hispanic students with disabilities, the district will focus on its social-emotional programming. So following its self-assessment to determine the root causes for this issue, the LEA identifies needs for professional development, materials, and services. So the LEA will use IDEA funds for professional development on conducting effective functional behavior analyses and writing behavior intervention plans. The LEA will braid IDEA and ARP ESSER III funds to purchase additional instructional and assessment materials. For example, behavior rating scales normed for this population, Spanish versions of the SEL curriculum for its instructional classrooms, etc. ARP ESSER III funds will support contractual services of bilingual teletherapy. Title I, Part A funds will provide parent training on supporting students with mental health needs in the Hispanic community. Title III funds will provide bilingual parapros to work with Spanish-speaking English learners with disabilities in classrooms with the greatest behavioral referrals. Title IV Part A funds will provide SEL curriculum and supplemental materials. In this scenario, In this scenario, we used various IDEA and title funds to address the needs of a targeted group of students with disabilities that receive suspensions. Various funds were braided to ensure a comprehensive initiative, but all grants maintain their identity and expenditures are clearly documented. The use of each of the funds were permitted under each grant program. So this one has a little bit more nuanced of cost allocation. So IDEA, costs related to teacher salaries and benefits, costs related to programming. ARP ESSER 3 also had costs related to teacher salaries and benefits and costs related to programming. Title I, Part A, costs related to SEL student materials. Title III, costs related to supplemental native language SEL supports and materials. Title IV, Part A, costs related to the well-rounded curriculum.
Can I ask a question about this scenario?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you come up to the microphone, please?
Oh, sure. Is it because of the ESSER funds that, I'm sorry if I'm too close now. Is it because of the ESSER funds that you're allowed to use the same, for the same thing? Like, for example, you said teacher salaries and benefits. The ESSER funds can be used as well as the IDEA funds. I always thought that that would be considered supplanting, which is why,
So some grants have a supplement, not supplant rule, and some do not. And so the next slide is going to talk about how you would allocate costs for, you've got two grants now, IDEA and ARP ESSER 3, there's two, I can count, that are both doing teacher salary and benefits. So this example includes both single grant expenditures and shared grant expenditures. The single grant charges are straightforward. The ones that go to Title III go to Title III. The ones that go to Title I go to Title I. The shared grant expenditures include costs for additional instructional and assessment materials. These costs are shared between IDEA and ARP ESSER 3. The shared grant expenditures must be allocated in direct proportion or benefit or on any reasonable documented basis if the direct proportion or benefit can't be determined without undue effort. In this scenario, the direct proportion or benefit could not be determined without undue effort, because how do you say a percentage of students, or a percentage of teacher salary goes to IDEA and a percentage goes to ARP ESSER 3? So personnel costs were chosen as the allocation base. Using the proportion of each grant's personnel costs to the total of such costs for the participating grants, the grantee can determine the amount of a specific expense to be charged to each grant. So IDEA had a total personnel cost of $250,000. ARP ESSER 3 had a total personnel cost of $50,000. So for a total of $300,000 of personnel costs. So they used that same percentage, so 83% of 250,000 is 83% of the 300, and 50,000 is 17%. So that's how they allocated the costs of the salaries. They did that math. So here's scenario number 4, and this is an EL-specific scenario. So to meet the needs of a growing English learner population and based on a comprehensive needs assessment, the district has decided to implement a sheltered instruction observation protocol model in all general education classrooms school-wide. So the LEA will use Title II, Part A funds to pay for the initial SIOP training for all general education and English learner teachers. Title I, Part A funding will be used to pay for coaches to support teachers as SIOP is implemented. The LEA will use Title III funds to pay for supplemental SIOP teacher materials, such as subject area SIOP books, and for supplemental student materials, such as scaffolded books and native language materials to support English learner instruction. IDEA funds will be used to pay for SIOP training for special education teachers. This scenario could also apply to a district wanting to expand bilingual instruction and bilingual services across the school. Title II Part A funds would pay for initial bilingual education training for teachers. Title I Part A funding would pay for bilingual coaches. Title III would pay for supplemental bilingual teacher materials and supplemental student materials, where IDEA funds would be used to pay for bilingual education training for special education teachers. Various funds were braided to ensure a comprehensive initiative, but all grants maintain their identity and expenditures are clearly documented. The use of each of the funds were permitted under each grant program. So again, the cost allocation was very straightforward. Coaches' salary and benefits went to Title I-A. Costs related to providing professional development for teachers went to Title II-A. Title III had supplemental SIOP books, and IDEA had costs related to providing PD on SIOP for special education staff. So the cost allocation is straightforward. Each grant program expends funds on a specific aspect of the school-wide SIOP. So we've kind of given four scenarios, but there are some financial management considerations. Obviously, this is going to be a little more detail-oriented than just being in a silo and saying Title III funds go here, Title I funds go here. Yes? Please come to the microphone.
How are any of these scenarios impacted if you only have targeted assistance sites? Like we are not district-wide.
You can still within, it can be school-wide also. So the district can decide for the school, we're going to braid and blend.
But can it only be at the schools that are identified as sites? So for example, we have 10 sites and only 3 are.
That's for Title I, correct?
Correct.
So then it would, if you're using Title I funds and you're braiding and blending your Title I funds, then yes, it would have to be only at those 3 sites. But you can braid and blend and not include Title I. You can use any combination of your federal, state, and local dollars to braid and blend.
So then where you'd have to be cautious then is that you're not supplanting. So for example, like the SIOP example.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted to do that and use Title I funds at our targeted assistance schools, we couldn't then also use other funds to do that, district funds to do that at the other 6, because that would be considered supplanting, correct?
I believe so. So
Okay.
you would have to be careful with that and,
Yeah.
and pay attention to all of the rules that go along with it.
All right, thank you.
So, all right. So financial management considerations. Federal funds must be spent properly on allowable costs, and there must be sufficient evidence that funds were spent properly. Braiding is a method for strategically leveraging these resources. It does not does not remove or reduce other program or financial requirements. Document, document, document. It is critical that all costs charged to a grant awards be documented such that a reasonably knowledgeable third party can also determine that the costs were allowable based upon the documentation maintained. So we need to be able to see, as ISBE, when we're looking at your Title III grant, that the expenditures you're putting to Title III are allowable. So you need to be able to document that, even when you're braiding and blending. So supplement, not supplant. Many federal awards require that the cost charged to the award be supplemental in nature. The method for demonstrating the supplemental nature of these costs will vary depending on the grant. So for example, funds made available under specific titles shall be used to supplement, not supplant, non-federal funds that would otherwise be used for activities authorized under the title. Title I Part A has a specific supplement, not supplant, maintain Title I neutrality and demonstrate resource allocation methodology. Title III has a supplement, not supplant. Funds may be used to pay for services that, in the absence of Title III funds, would not be necessary to be provided by other federal, state, or local funds, and must be used to supplement state, local, and other federal funds and not supplant those funds. So each of your grants may have a supplement, not supplant rule that's unique to that grant. So you do need to pay attention to that when you are doing your braiding and blending. Equipment and inventory items must be recorded accurately and timely in order to ensure proper tracking of the items. This ensures proper oversight and usage of the items to support the intended programs. So you still need to keep if you're braiding and blending and purchasing equipment, you do still need to track that appropriately for each grant. All right, time and effort considerations. Federal and state regulations require that salaries and wages be charged to grants be adequately documented and that the grantee maintain sufficient management oversight in the form of an internal control system to ensure that charges are allowable, allocable, and accurately reflect the total activity for which the employee is being compensated. So salary and wages based on records that accurately reflect the work is performed, internal controls that ensure accuracy, allowability, and allocability, and reflect the total activity. Some additional considerations. These are the basic pillars of cost allowability. Specific cost types may have other requirements. For example, explicit prior approval for equipment purchases and travel. It is important to keep in mind the general allowability considerations. In general, a claimed cost must be reasonable, necessary, allocable, documented, and must meet allowability requirements for the cost categories. So I want to bring it back to this graphic that we showed at the beginning. Blending and braiding is as simple as these 3 steps, and you probably are already doing it to a point in your districts. You assess the needs through a needs assessment, your Consolidated District Plan. You identify components and the costs of activities, your cost and resource allocation methodology, and then you identify the federal grants and determine if costs are necessary and reasonable, and you verify the consistency with your CDP. We have additional resources that are out there to help you. There's the Federal Uniform Guidance, ISBE Grant Fiscal Procedure Handbook, ESSER 1 webinar, ESSER 2 webinar. There's an FAQ for elementary and secondary school emergency relief programs and the GEARS programs. We highly encourage you to pay attention to all of these and work with the other directors and administrators in your district to coordinate and to braid and blend funds. On a side note, we are not just presenting this to bilingual directors. This presentation is being shared with other directors and other departments. We have done a webinar that's available, which a lot of this is taken from, that was sent for superintendents and business office people. We really want districts to maximize the use of their funds, especially with this, all the ESSER and GEARS funding. We really need to leverage our money and our funding effectively. One final slide. We do have this QR code, which is a form. So if you have questions related to blending and braiding that may be district specific, please use this form and submit it. I know Natasha is monitoring the results, and someone will reach out to you to talk about your district specific needs for this questions about blending and braiding. And I'm sorry, I keep stuttering right when I go to say that because for whatever reason, I want to say blending and braiding, which is not right. So at this time, are there any questions or comments about blending and braiding in general that you'd like to ask either one of us? No? All experts? Okay. Well, I know personally, having been a bilingual director, sometimes it's hard to get in to do some of this collaboration. It is really hard to break down those silos. But the advocacy that you guys do and ensuring that you are aware that ELs are covered under Title I. And so Title I funds can be used to support English learners. Same thing for Title II and Title IV. There's all these other funding sources. ELEBF money can all be braided and blended to support English learners. So I encourage you to continue to learn about the different funding sources and to work with your Title I directors, your financial officers, your superintendents to advocate for, hey, let's be strategic about this. So thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.